And if you think for a second that where you are right now is limiting your ability to rise up, let me tell you my story. So I've known I was poor for basically my entire life. South Bronx, housing projects, Cortland Ave, single mom, Puerto Rican family, third generation of living in that cycle. I remember as early as elementary school, my mom would lecture me and my sister about the need for us to break that cycle. There's a moment that replays in my head every time I need to remind myself of that motivation. I was in 3rd grade. I came home with an 80 on a test, a science test. The next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my sister eating Eggo waffles when my mom storms into the kitchen. She got her hand on her hip, the test in her hand, and she looks right at me and she goes, "Leah, what is this?" Pointing at the big red 80 at the top of the paper. And I think, no big deal, kids in my class get 80s all the time. But she continues, "How do you think you're gonna get into college with this?" I don't think many 8-year-olds think about college. But she went on. "You know I can't pay for it, Leah. You need to get scholarships. How are you gonna get scholarships with a B?" She was serious. To my mom, it was more than just a B on a test. It was the possibility of failure and never making it out of the projects. I think that's the moment it clicked for me, the moment that my mom's lectures on our financial distress turned into my motivation for future success. From that day forward, I never brought home another B on a test. I did everything my mom expected of me, not because she told me to, but because I wanted to. I learned to love school because I didn't see it as a burden. I saw it as an opportunity, as a way out. Education is the great equalizer. And as my mom constantly reminded us, education was the key to breaking the cycle. And according to her, breaking the cycle was my responsibility. So I took that responsibility and I carried it with me all the way from the South Bronx to the Ivy League. And it was a constant struggle. We went from apartment to apartment, from eviction notice to car repossession, from public assistance to food stamps, from foreclosure to homelessness, and a lot of other nonsense in between. But the harder my life got, the stronger my motivation grew. Sometimes the pressure becomes too much. There were plenty of times where I cried and complained and said, life is too hard, I can't take it anymore. That moment when you feel like all you want to do is give up, that's the ultimate test. And the way that we respond to that test is what separates the losers from the winners. The I can'ts from the I cans. The why me's from the try me's. The victims that use their circumstances as an excuse from the victors that use it as their motivation. For me, that test came when I was a junior in high school, when my family and I became homeless. A couple of years before that, we had moved out of the projects, trying to make a better life for ourselves. But it turns out that your life just doesn't automatically get better when you leave the block. We try to buy a house. Mortgages are way less affordable than subsidized housing. So within a couple of months, the house that we lived in went into foreclosure, and it was being taken from us. We woke up one morning to an eviction notice on the door saying you have to be out in 24 hours. It doesn't matter that you have 4 kids and nowhere to go. So we packed up the U-Haul truck for what was my 11th time moving, and I got dropped off at school that day not knowing where I was going to sleep that night. We ended up checking into what they call an extended stay hotel, which is about the size of a project apartment living room, and in it was 2 queen-size beds, a refrigerator, a microwave, and a really tiny bathroom, and that's where 6 of us lived, my mom, my stepdad, and my 3 sisters, for almost a year. That was the second half of my junior year and the first half of my senior year, the time that I was applying to college. But I didn't let that stop me. I used it as my inspiration and my motivation, and it made for a hell of a college essay. And within the next year, I became valedictorian of my high school. I passed 10 AP tests. I got a near perfect score on my SAT, and I became one of the first students from my high school to get into an Ivy League university. But you know where I ended up? where I found myself the summer before I started Columbia? Right back on the block, in the same project department that it all started in. Back to the only place that ever felt like home. So fully reminded of my roots, I stepped foot on Columbia campus with the mission of breaking the cycle of poverty once and for all. Fast forward 4 years, and now I work at a global corporate bank, making more than enough money to afford my own unsubsidized apartment in New York City. So I did it, I made it, right? I work in a fancy building in Rockefeller Center on the 52nd floor. And from the window, I could see the projects in the South Bronx. Only a bridge away, but a whole world apart. But I should be proud of that, right? Yeah, I made it out, but what about everybody that didn't? I don't even want to talk about where my friends from the block ended up. But not even that, my family too. My sisters, my mother, and my grandmother still reside on the other side of that bridge. And let me tell you, the view from the top is not always better when the ones that you love are still on the bottom. The further I progress from my neighborhood, the stronger my desire grows to go back and help those people progress with me. Can I tell you right now that in this moment, I feel more successful than I ever have? Not in my fancy cubicle up on the 52nd floor, but right here on this stage with you guys. Sharing my story with the hopes of inspiring the next generation of project kids that they can accomplish anything they put their minds to in spite of whatever their situation is right now. Thank you.